Well, I don't have a true crime podcast. I know I probably should, but I just can't get my act together to have one. So I'm going to talk solo about this and see if we can create some dialogue here about what's occurred in the JonBenet Ramsey case. Um, my interest in this case goes back to 1996 when it happened. There was not really a genre as true crime at that point. People would say to me like, "Oh, you're a conspiracy theorist." Yeah, I don't know. There was no conspiracy there really, but I have to say I bought into a lot of the narrative that was put out in tabloids, People magazine, newspapers. I even remember reading a really good article about JonBenet in the Village Voice. The Village Voice. I mean, they said something like her mother's faulty wardrobe aesthetic, like something very pretentious sounding about the way she dressed JonBenet. And I also feel like that whole fascination with JonBenet gave way to a whole genre of fascination with children's beauty pageants, which is so weird because people love to criticize the voyeurism behind these pageants and point to the sort of obvious I, uncomfortable things that come to mind when you think about such a thing. I'm being careful with my words because if I put this on YouTube, you get like strikes if you use certain words. Just too bad. It makes no sense. It's just we're talking about stuff, trying to really prevent these things from happening or raise awareness about them. And the JonBenet Ramsey case really did bring that to the forefront. It was unfortunate that this was this side little thing that the mom did with her daughter because it threw the parents into this extremely critical light right from the get-go. As did a couple of other things that people just couldn't relate. They were like, "Oh, look, they're this like wealthy Boulder family, and look at their perfect blah blah blah," and criticizing the use of the daughter in the beauty pageants when Patsy is from or was from the South, and that's like something that's a little more commonplace there certainly than it is up north. I don't know any kids who were ever in oh yeah, my daughter's friends, but that was also, she was like her own freak show. I mean, she was very beautiful, but everybody was like, "Oh my god, she's in pageants." It just was like not the endeavor that people pursued. So there had so many strikes against them from the beginning, not to mention the Boulder police doing a really not a good job at all. It was sloppy, it was amateurish. I know they had their excuses, like one of the detectives said, "Well, we didn't think this was a crime scene in a murder case. We thought it was a kidnapping." Well, isn't that a crime? I mean, there is just, yeah, there's a lot of like excuses being made for things, but yeah, so you kind of had a perfect storm of people just not liking the Ramseys in general for sort of petty reasons, and then the Ramseys retained legal counsel very early on, which was a bad optic. Everybody looked at that like, what are they doing? Only somebody who was guilty or had something to hide would have done such a thing. So that didn't help them. And in this recent documentary on Netflix, John Ramsey explains that we got a tip from somebody on the inside who said, "Hey, listen, the police are looking at you guys and only you guys. And so you should really protect yourselves." So anyway, so there was all of that. And then there were some other like minor theories, like there was a kind of like sketchy Santa Claus character and whatever. But you know what I don't hear talked about enough? I don't remember where I saw this, but I definitely look, I have done my research. I have a picture of me. I don't know if I can insert it in the edit of me holding my JonBenet scrapbook from 1997. I was very into it. I read books on the topic. I really absorbed all of this information. And one thing that did not come up in the Netflix documentary is that somehow the Ramsey's house was on this like holiday decoration home tour kind of a thing where I guess like you signed up for this, it was just like this like fun activity in Boulder around the holidays, and you could go to these houses that were decorated and stuff. So there were people traipsing through the Ramsey's home shortly before Christmas that would have given them a great opportunity to scope things out. What a perfect tour for someone to do who was plotting a crime, even if it was just a burglary. So there was that. And there was also like a lot of photographers that had photographed these girls in pageants and so forth, and they were likely suspects. And there were a few other peripheral people who should have been looked at more closely. But the police, the detectives, the prosecutors, they were like, this was an inside job. They all felt that way very strongly by weird little details that they fixated on. For example, they didn't see a way into the house. And when Detective Lou Smit came out of retirement to help with this, it was the first thing he did. He showed how you could easily get into the back of their house through this little, it was like a grate, and then you slipped down, you were below the ground surface, you kicked open the window, you went in, there was a suitcase placed right there with John Ramsey had said had not been there before, and that was in the room where JonBenet was found. And the other thing in the documentary is you really see the gruesomeness and the violence of how she perished. And to think that a family member did that in a fit of anger is really beyond. And, maybe that's just a byproduct of how much we have absorbed in the true crime world, where we see and hear about all sorts of horrific crimes against family members and innocents and children. And there's so many examples of deplorable behavior that I think today's mind looking at that is like, yeah, so what? Her parents could have done that. Her brother could have done it. All of this stuff. But like I said, when you watch the documentary and you really get like a close-up of it, and they show some of the crime scene photos, not like kind of zoomed back, but kind of like in close focus. And you're like, no, this is not a mom who got mad at her daughter for wetting the bed. That was one of the theories. And one of the police on the part of the Boulder police, his name was Steve Thomas, he really dug his heels in. He even wrote a book about why it was Patsy who he believed committed this crime. And fortunately, the Ramseys sued him for millions of dollars. I believe they settled out of court, but it was, it was a disgusting thing to do. And there was no evidence to show that everything was speculation. Here's another thing that got fed to the media. There were no footprints in the snow. This is really twisted when you start talking about the ethics of crime coverage. There was no snow. There was no snow in the backyard. There was a little bit of dusting in the front yard, but there was no snow in the backyard. So these kind of things, like, yeah, there were no footprints in the snow because there was no snow. And that kind of thing just got fed out to the public, and we ate it up with a spoon, and I did too. It took me a long time. It was really not until I did a deep dive on Lou Smit, or Smit, singular, that I was like, oh, wait, he just showed how easy it was for someone to come into the house. And then there was that whole thing about that weirdo I think he was in Thailand, John Mark Carr, and how he fessed up and said, no, I did it. And then the DNA didn't match. And that was like hugely disappointing. But anyway, where we are today in 2024 is that the Ramseys they want the remaining DNA to be tested, to be run against the CODIS database, to be, the answers are there. The answers are there. And if you're wondering like where all this resistance comes from, part of the problem is the police department, who did not do a good job of anything. I mean, everything from securing the scene to even the integrity of the DNA. They didn't do a good job. And probably every single time something like this comes up, some other documentary that's like swept the public interest, they're probably mortified, and they should be. But this is many, many years ago. I would think they have moved past it. Many have retired. I think when you become a seasoned cop or detective, you can say to yourselves, we could have done a better job. Yeah, granted, we accused a family and didn't look at anybody else, and they doubly ruined their lives. So that's another thing you learn from the documentary. I already knew that John Ramsey had lost a daughter in a car crash. How tragic and unbelievable to lose two of your children in accidental deaths. I mean, just think about the odds of that happening. It's so horrific. And you also really see his love for Patsy. And there's another thing that he brings up that I really don't want to skip over. And for any of the doubters out there who are like, no, it's still Patsy. He says in this moment, he talks a lot about her ovarian cancer, stage 4. I mean, they almost lost her. It was very, very close to that. And she went into remission, and she just was such a devoted mother. He talks about how she was so grateful to be alive. She was so grateful that JonBenet was born. And that she was there to raise her. Like, would that person, having gone through what she went through, commit the kind of crime that she's accused of committing? These are things that, like, you can't look at true crime in this kind of two-dimensional way. People are multidimensional. There are other factors that can come into play, not just some little story that you told yourself makes the most sense because we've seen other cuckoo moms do things like this. We've seen other situations of filicide. This was not that. I am 100% sure on that. So if you want to refute me, go ahead. But I'm pretty steadfast in this. Anyway, watch the documentary. It's pretty fascinating. Thank you. Here I am in my New York City apartment. The year is 1997. And I actually made a JonBenet scrapbook. I can't really find a good shot of this t-shirt, but there I am with my JonBenet t-shirt on. Also in New York, probably 1998 or 7.